So this morning's program turns around the winner of the Pringle Lecturer Award, which is always an exciting talk. And I've heard a few in the past myself as a visitor. And this morning, we're particularly fortunate to have Carol Rosenberg, who's a military affairs reporter at the Miami Herald, with us. This is an award that's selected by the full-time faculty of the school after really lively discussion and consideration. And so it always goes to someone who really has the deep respect of her peers. In Carol's case, that's because primarily of the intrepid work that she's done at Guantanamo Bay from long before it was a popular subject to cover with such attention and independence as she has done. The lecture that she's about to give us is named for Henry Pringle, who was a professor here in the 1930s. And it honors a journalist who has an outstanding body of work on politics, policy, and the comings and goings of Washington, D.C. So Carol is a reporter with a diverse career. She's been a foreign correspondent in the Middle East and written about foreign affairs more broadly. But she has, in addition to all that, really devoted herself to covering detention issues at Guantanamo since January 11th, 2002. And she's really the only journalist to have documented the operations of that facility in its earliest days. And she's been recognized with numerous awards, the 2014 Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press First Amendment Award, which she received last night here in New York, the 2011 Robert F. Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights Domestic Reporting Prize, and she was part of a Miami Herald team that won a Pulitzer for Breaking News in 2001. So please welcome this year's Pringle Lecturer, Carol Rosenberg.
Give me 30 seconds. So before I ever set foot in Guantanamo, I was a reporter in the Middle East. I had a house in Jerusalem and an apartment in Cairo, and I traveled the region: Sudan, Syria, Baghdad, Beirut. It was before the web, so I wrote for tomorrow morning's readers. And often I was struck by how very tribal life and my work was there. Jews and Palestinians, Sunni and Shiite, the George Bushes and the Saddam Husseins. And journalists were a tribe too. Sometimes we traveled in packs, and sometimes we chased each other to outrace each other to a scoop, an interview, to tell a story better. But we hung together in bars, raced together to invasions. We watched each other's backs at bombings, doorstepped peace talks, and were fiercely loyal when someone got in trouble, got hurt, kidnapped. And when one of us got killed, this does happen, we mourned together. And I came to see the world through that prism. So in the dozen years I've been reporting about the prison camps at the US Navy base in Cuba called Guantanamo, the place America set up after the September 11th attacks to lock up suspected terrorists, I see tribes too. There, the detainees belong to one: Al-Qaeda, Taliban, captives long ago cleared for release. There are the sailors assigned to the base, like townies. They come with their kids in their cars and they settle in for 3 or more years. Most of the prison camp guards go for a year or less, unaccompanied, live in temporary housing and are in a sense untethered. Some eat too much, others drink too much, and another group spend their time obsessively getting fit, running, gym, spinning, prompting a clever minder of mine from the Colorado National Guard to observe that after a year at the detention center, guards leave 3 ways: hunks, chunks, drunks. There are more tribes: the 9/11 families picked by the Pentagon lottery to watch the war court, Jamaican and Filipinos who do the scut work, defense lawyers who come and go and mostly have common interests. And sometimes there are the journalists. But at times, like last month, I'm the only reporter down there, alone in media tent city, where scoops are rare but possible. You can't get hurt, you can't get kidnapped, but you do get sneered at by American soldiers for asking questions, for asking to see something at the prison whose military mission statement includes the word transparency. It's an assignment that, when, frankly, I'm not with my tribe, can be a bit lonely. So this isn't some sort of like sappy bid for sympathy, not at all. It's my long way of saying how grateful I am for this opportunity to talk to my tribe, you journalists, about what I do, how I do it, and why. And that is, for the past 12 years, I have had one of the most challenging, at times frustrating, rarely boring, and bedrock fundamentally important beats in American journalism. One I could never have imagined and wasn't designed by editors or in a news lab. It grew organically out of an assignment that became an obligation and morphed into a beat like no other. I covered the detention center at Guantanamo Bay for the Miami Herald, the paper that hired me to report in the Middle East and considers Cuba a local story. I write about a place. I write about people. I write about policy and politics in what seems to me to be the first no-exit strategy U.S. military enterprise since the Vietnam War. I deal with a military that at times doesn't like to answer my questions, won't talk to me, censors my photos, restricts my movements, routinely threatens to ban me from further visits in a system of military intimidation, and decides at times on a whim that I should sleep in a tent rather than pay like anyone else for a hotel available to civilian guests, $50 a night. From that tent, I write about an evolving system of justice, at times alone because no other news organization will make the trek, or in the company of reporters who show up for a ticket punch, a been there, done that dateline, and a cheap shot at this historic system, the military commissions. Make no mistake, this is a court like no other. Not because the US seeks to execute 6 men there, 5 for the 9/11 attacks and 1 man for the USS Cole bombing, and not because a soldier sits in the room behind me as I write, even when I'm the only one there, but because we're years into trial preparations for men who were long denied lawyers or Red Cross visits, and attorneys at the war court I cover still argue about what portions of the Constitution apply. I don't write about what happened to 3,000 people on September 11th or why 17 sailors had to die in al-Qaeda's suicide bombing of the USS Cole off Yemen in 2000. I am certain that other journalists, fellow tribe members, will show up for that part. I write about whether the CIA will ever allow the accused and the world to learn how agents interrogated suspects in nations they won't name using now forbidden interrogation techniques we glimpse only through leaks and misconduct reports. I write about the FBI trying to turn a member of the defense team into a snitch and informant. This is a system that American lawyers in American uniforms call un-American. This American court has a motto: fairness, transparency, justice. As they close the hearings and seal up the filings and soldiers sit behind me watching me work, the motto comes to mock me. I didn't understand why exactly. Then Eugene Fidel, who teaches law at Yale Law School, explained it. If you're really fair, if you're really transparent, really just, you don't need a motto. It would be, as the founder said, self-evident. But it didn't start that way. It started with a phone call from the Pentagon subsidiary in Miami, the Southern Command, notifying me that it was about to get into the prison business, and would I like to come along? It was months after the September 11th attacks, 3 months. America was scared. Our troops in Afghanistan were overwhelmed with foreign men dropped off and dragged into our outposts by Pakistanis and Afghan Northern Alliance, by tribesmen looking for a CIA bounty, and occasionally by US troops who encountered suspected foreign fighters in their patrol. These captives were cold. It was freezing in Afghanistan. Some were angry. They had been treated brutally. And they were rather a mystery to us, mostly because we hadn't much practiced the art of military interrogation in a foreign environment since Vietnam, not interrogated in any meaningful way. And somebody had the bright idea to pick them up and fly them 8,000 miles to a US occupation zone in southeast Cuba, where it was hot, sunny, stuck behind a minefield, and the Bush administration thought, against all reason, out of reach of American law, out of reach of the Geneva Conventions. I didn't know that it was going to be a place where we'd carry out tribunals whose endgame is meant to execute people. I didn't imagine that it would go on for a decade plus, 2 US presidents, 4 secretaries of defense, 13 prison camp commanders. The Pentagon was setting up a prison. Donald Rumsfeld's least worst place was in my paper's backyard. It was a story that hadn't been written. My boss told me to go down there and not come back until it was over. I watched the first 20 men come off a US cargo plane like a poor man's Hannibal Lecter, in orange jumpsuits and shackles and surgical masks and blackout goggles, and 759 more prisoners would follow. 625 would get to go, 9 of them dead. And it's still not over. So what do? Sometimes I'm a court reporter, sometimes I'm a cop reporter, sometimes I'm a feature writer. People think I'm a human rights reporter. My title is military affairs correspondent. More often than not, I feel like a foreign correspondent down there. In the 90s, I'd go to places like Iraq under Saddam Hussein to write about sanctions, to Kuwait to report on life rebuilding after Iraq's invasion. I got a visa to Khartoum while it was the haven for outcasts of radical Islam, the way I'd go to many, many countries, by landing a visa, an entry permit. I'd get in by government invitation. If they wanted to show the press something, you'd hear from the embassy or information ministry. Or I'd pitch a story idea with the notion of trying to get in the country and turning up more than one thing. They would let me in when confidence was high in their ability to control the narrative, or they were so embattled they were desperate to tell their version of the story. And when they found the scrutiny stressful, they would throw me out. Guess what it takes to go to Guantanamo to report at the prison? An area clearance. It's like a Pentagon visa to their own private country with town and school and court and detention center, and when confidence is high in their ability to control the narrative and they feel they have a story to tell, getting in is easy. For instance, after 3 detainees were found hanging one June weekend in 2006, the prison commander allowed me onto the base, with tremendous limitations, but on the ground. I wasn't allowed to see where they were found dead or speak with the guards who discovered them. Investigators were at the base, but I didn't even get a glimpse of them, nor did I get to see the nooses the prisoners were supposedly found hanging in. I did get to speak with the imam who was brought in to prepare the dead for Muslim burial, but that's because I recognized him and he knew me from when he was posted there before. Mostly, I asked questions, and more than a few by phone from one side of the bay to the other. After a couple of days, someone in Donald Rumsfeld's office sent in a plane to fetch me and the 3 other journalists who were there. Narrative control up at the Pentagon smeared me, said I'd slipped without permission onto the base that's surrounded by sea, a minefield, and guarded by the US Marines. And you need an area clearance, permission to land there. So often I treat the assignment like a foreign correspondent. Observation and explanation of something you can't see is key. But you can only do so much Kilroy was here, peek over the wall with funny observations style reporting. Going back again and again means going deeper. That means I start reading and questioning and thinking and planning long before I get on the airplane to go there. And in that regard, it's a virtual beat. I report from my desk in Miami on the phone with people who frankly don't want to be seen with me. Or at the airport in Fort Lauderdale, where a small charter comes from Guantanamo. I get emails, but not as many as you'd think. People are afraid. And after what happened to Private Chelsea Manning, they have reason to be. I report in Washington where the coverage is political. I go to people who want to keep Guantanamo forever if they're likely to give me the information I need, or advocates of closure if I think they might disclose it. I search the web for documents and news tips, contracts, PowerPoints, Facebook, Twitter, by trying to think like a member of the military. I've gotten stuff anonymously in the mail and been worried somebody was trying to set me up. Sometimes I start a story with an interview at Gitmo. We used to call this gathering string. And then I'd pull that thread as I go from place to place, Andrews Air Force Base, the McClatchy Bureau, a conference. Increasingly, calling me the military affairs correspondent seems wrong. Yeah, it's a military base and they're having military hearings, but it's more like I cover a small town that has a prison, a court, and McDonald's. And also the worst internet access you can imagine, for which I pay $150 a week, all controlled by the US military. That means I write in a notepad. I go on foot or on the bus to ask people questions when my military minders don't restrict my movement. And that's not the journalism most people practice these days. I describe places because the military won't let us show it on film. And I cover jury selection of unnamed US military officers at the tribunals because it gives you a window into the soldiers who will sit in judgment on the enemy. I use just about every trick in the 21st century journalist toolbox. I have Google Glass when they let me turn it on. I tweet a live stream of court proceedings, bulletin style, to show people who can't be there what's going on moment to moment. I write for tomorrow's paper and this afternoon's online reader, and I just take terrible pictures. Sometimes I file using the Freedom of Information Act if I haven't been able to persuade an officer that the information I seek is releasable. But I use it sparingly because you have to be willing to sue the government. Something I did last year with a clinic from Yale Law School to shake loose a list of prisoners the US wants to hold forever. Now I have another lawsuit for how much we, the people, spent building a secret prison down there. I want to get a hearing. I don't blog because, frankly, I'm an old school reporter. And to me, blogging is loaded with opinions. Plus, I don't know about other places, but at mine, we don't edit our blogs. It's like self-publishing. And I'm either dumb enough or smart enough to know I need an editor. Particularly when I'm writing in the press room at Gitmo where everybody's talking, there's a soldier watching, and I haven't had enough sleep last night in my tent. I've been doing this since day one. I've maybe spent around 1,000 nights down there. And the military has never let me, or any reporter, any member of the tribe, talk to a detainee. It's one of those lifetime banning offenses. Even when they've wanted to talk to me, even when I've arranged a waiver through an attorney. A few have called and emailed after they got out. You know what they say? Thank you for writing about me. Thank you for telling my story. Sometimes I follow the money. I spent 2011 ferreting out the costs of the place. I started by asking to meet with the money crunchers, do an interview. The military stalled for a while and then refused. So I dug through contracts, worked through Congress, talked repeatedly to the Bureau of Prisons, and consulted correctional experts, all to develop a theory of what I would need. I never did get anything directly from that year's prison public affairs officer, a Navy commander whose job was to provide information to the public. But I asked microscopic expense questions in every prison camp interview, saved documents, pulled the string on searches, found friendly sources up at the Pentagon, and concluded it conservatively cost $380,000 a year per prisoner, or liberally $800,000 a year per prisoner, 30 times the cost of housing someone in federal detention. We called it the most expensive prison on earth first. Lots of folks followed us, including members of Congress who want to close the place, and last year did a soup to nuts estimate, $2.7 million per year per prisoner. They uncovered costs I couldn't, and included some I wouldn't attribute directly to prison operations. So why do I do it? So why do I do it? Sometimes when I get a little bit lost or wonder why I write about these 154 men who nobody really cares about, except hopefully their families and their lawyers, I remember that the United States government built it to be out of reach of the American people, out of reach of American courts, to make it hard and remote, so we won't think about the fact that it is ours. You know, the military calls Guantanamo the most transparent detention center on earth. Hundreds of reporters have visited there, they say, since the first al-Qaeda suspects arrived in 2002. They skip the part about how few go back more than once, frustrated by the hoops, the time, the costs of doing basic journalism, being a court reporter, writing a feature story, conducting an interview. Sometimes I go back honestly because they don't want me to. Recently, the military decided after 8 months of releasing hunger strike figures that its transparency wasn't working for them. So now new troops down there call the hunger strike count classified, a state secret. But part of it is the fault of American journalism too. It's hard to be a reporter at Guantanamo. It takes days to travel there. The military can be abusive or infantilizing. The military supports big sweep features that generalize to the point of being dismissible or dumb down the details. Newsroom money crunchers want crisp, beginning and end budget travel. Editors want front-page stories that are candidates for prizes. So thank you for this invitation, because rarely the incremental is honored. My stories can't be wrapped up with a ribbon and declared done. Guantanamo, didn't President Obama sign an order to close it during his first year in office? There are 154 men held captive at Guantanamo by a military operation staffed by 2,200 federal employees, mostly soldiers. The death penalty trials are just beginning. Next month, an admiral will arrive at the base as the 14th prison camp's commander. Sometimes I tell a story a day at a time, and I know that's an unpopular thing. Plus, I like the incremental. Important stories do unfold a day at a time. Process is part of reporting. The effort to distinguish in the cell blocks between prisoners so angry, who hate America so much, or how they've been treated so much that they might do harm, from those who are just disappointed, or beaten down, or so ready to leave this life behind for the next one that they won't be a threat to anyone. Court reporting is incremental. Police reporting is incremental. Political and policy reporting is incremental too. This story is not going away. President Obama's pledge to empty the detention center, totally incremental. The last detainee to go was an Algerian, Ahmed Belbacha, who went home in March. There are 77 other captives like him on a list somewhere that says he can go if the administration sets up a sound plan for resettling him or repatriating him safely. Sometimes that means getting a country to agree to lock him up. So one message I have, because this is the Columbia Journalism School and I've been reporting for 35 years, is think about reporting in the traditional way. Courts, cops, color stories, celebrities, corruption, and use the old tools as well as the new ones. Beat reporting is its own virtue. Getting up off your butt, stepping away from your computer, leaving those 99 Google searches to other reporters may be risky in some respects. But showing up has meaning. You can't see the progress on what you report without going again and again to watch, ask questions. You have to take time out to read. If it's a court story, you have to read the briefs, footnotes, transcripts. Keep your eyes open. Think about the logic of what you're being told and not told, shown and not shown. Sure, call yourself an investigative reporter, but the same disciplines apply. Anonymous sources can weaken your point, errors hurt your credibility. If someone doesn't want to put his or her name behind it, ask yourself what else that source is doing or protecting. Is there a better way to report it? Having editors who support you is one part luck and one part tending to the relationship as much as you would a source. And sometimes the best stories, the stories that may be the salvation of American journalism, unfold a day at a time. But for now, use all the tools, hone your craft, care for your tribe. Thank you.